IXL Section AA.5, Factor Quadratics with Other Leading Coefficients. All right, this IXL is extremely important. I highly recommend everyone to pay attention and to do this IXL. And even to my top students, I'll say, please pay attention to this IXL. It'll really help you understand how to do these and demystify the process of how you do this. Because at first it may seem confusing, but I promise you, if you watch the video and do the IXL, you're going to become awesome at doing this. And you're going to realize that there is a technique to do these and it's not that difficult at all. Okay, now, before I begin, I got to tell you that I did this IXL and I had to work out every single problem. I had to write it out. I ended up using front and back approximately 2 pieces of paper. All right, so if I if I have to write it out, that means that you guys are going to have to write it out as well to do these problems, right? I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to do these mental math. I had to write them out, so will you. Okay, let me just say that real quick in Spanish. En español, este IXL es súper importante porque le voy a enseñar cómo factorizar las expresiones cuando tienen un número que no sea 1 al principio. Si ponen atención y practican este IXL, van a entender muy bien cómo hacer estos problemas y van a ver que no es tan difícil, que hay un proceso que se puede usar cada vez para siempre cogerlo bien. Yo tuve que escribir todas las calculaciones para todos estos problemas en este IXL, así que si yo lo tuve que escribir, eso quiere decir que ustedes también van a necesitar escribirlo. Yo tuve que usar 2 hojas de papel adelante y atrás para hacer las calculaciones. Okay, así que deben coger una hoja de papel para practicar. All right, so let's look at our first problem. Okay, first thing I'm going to tell you is that for every problem, you should first check to see whether you could factor out a greatest common factor before you begin. For all of our initial problems, you're not going to be able to factor out a greatest common factor at the beginning. But when we get to those problems, I'm going to point it out. But first, always check to see if you could factor out a greatest common factor. In this problem, there's nothing that I could factor out. If you don't know what I mean, when I get to one where you could factor something out, you'll see what I mean. Okay, siempre al principio tenemos que chequear si hay un factor más grande que tienen en común los 3 términos. Para todos los problemas al principio de este video, no existe un factor más grande en común. Pero sí vamos a llegar más tarde a problemas donde sí se pueden sacar un factor más grande que tienen en común. Okay, now here's to the important part. The first thing you're going to do is this. Okay, all of these problems are written in this form. Okay, all the problems are written in the form, ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, so they're all written in this form. They may have a different variable, but they're written in this form. Todos los problemas están escritos en esta forma, a veces con un variable diferente, pero todos están en esta forma. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is ask ourselves, what is a times c? A times c equals what? A times c, that means this number and this number. When you multiply this number times this number, what do I get? I get 15, right? Okay, lo primero que me voy a preguntar es, ¿cuánto te da el producto de A por C? A es este número, C es este número. Me da 15. Okay, now, out of the factors of 15, these are the factors of 15. Which combination will add up to this number right here, to B? When you add them, which combination will give you the number that's where B is? Okay, obviously it's this combination. Okay, so that's the combination I'm going to use right now, okay? So again, I asked myself, what's A times C? I got 15. Now, of the factors of 15, which combination will give me this number? Okay, de los factores de 15, ¿cuál es la única combinación que me puede dar, cuando lo sumo, que me puede dar este número aquí? El 8 sería el 3 y el 5. Okay, now look, this process that I'm going to explain to you, it has a name. The name of this process is called splitting the middle. And I'm telling you the name because I think it'll help you understand what I'm going to do, and it'll help you remember the process. Splitting the middle. Okay, este proceso lo llaman splitting the middle, rompiendo el medio, porque creo que ese nombre lo va a ayudar a recordarse de lo que voy a hacer. Okay, so look, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to split the middle term using these two numbers. I'm going to split it like this. Okay, why is it called splitting the middle? Notice the two terms in the middle. If I add 3k plus 5k, I get what was here originally, 8k. I'm just using these numbers, okay? Si yo sumo estos dos términos, me da lo que tenía aquí originalmente antes de romperlo en dos pedazos, okay? Listen, I promise after you see like 2 or 3 examples, you're going to get the hang of it. So if you're like confused, give me a second. Stick with me. Trust me on this, okay? Si están confundidos, dame 2, 3 o 4 ejemplos para que vean, después que vean 3 o 4 ejemplos, se van a dar cuenta del proceso y que es fácil. Okay, now that I got to split it up like that, now I'm going to do what's called factor by grouping. Factor by grouping, which means I'm going to put parentheses around this part and parentheses around this part and take out the greatest common factor. So what's the greatest common factor in this expression? 3k. Now 3k times what will give you what's in here? 3k times what will give you 3k to the second power? 3k times k. And 3k times what will give you 3k? 3k times 1. Now over here, take out the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is 5. I put the parentheses. 5 times what will give you 5k? 5 times k. And 5 times what will give you 5? 5 times 1. Okay, now notice that inside the parentheses, I got the same thing in both parentheses. You always have to get the same thing in both parentheses. If you don't get the same thing in both parentheses, you did something wrong. It's got to give you the same thing in both parentheses. So now for my final answer, I'm going to put this part and this part together, 3k plus 5, in one parentheses. And in the other parentheses, I'm going to put k plus 1. And that is my final answer. If you multiply those two binomials together, you're going to get the original expression, I promise you. All right? If you didn't fully understand that, hold on. Let me do another example before you panic and say, no, this is too hard, I can't do it. Give me a second. Let me do another example, okay? Si no lo entendieron bien, déjame hacer otro ejemplo para que vean que no es difícil. All right? So I'm going to erase all this and let's go to the next one. All right. So again, what's the first step? The first step is I'm going to ask myself, what's A times C? Okay, ¿cuánto me da A por C? 2 times 9 gives me 18. Okay, now out of all the factors of 18, which I'll write them out here for you, those are the factors of 18. Out of the factors of 18, which combination can I add or subtract to get this number right here? Okay, the combination is 2 and 9. Because 2 times 9 is 18 and 2 plus 9 is 11. Okay? And by the way, yeah, I'm realizing that in these first two examples, it's the same numbers that are here, but it's not going to always be like that. So don't think it's always like that because it's not. Okay? Así que, de los factores de 18, ¿cuál es la única combinación que me da que la suma me da 11? Sería el 2 y el 9. Sí me doy cuenta que en estos ejemplos son los mismos números que están aquí, pero no siempre va a ser así que no pueden pensar que siempre son los números que están aquí, porque no. Okay, solamente por ahora son los mismos números que están aquí. Okay, now I'm going to split the middle, romper el medio. Okay, now, so I'm going to write, this number stays the same, this term stays the same, este término se mantiene igual, and this term also stays the same. Este término también se queda igual. In the middle, I'm going to put these two numbers with the letter J behind them. En el medio voy a poner estos dos números con la letra J atrás. Okay, now look. I could have put the 9J here and the 2J here, and you still get it the same answer, okay? Because I'm sure some of you are wondering that. So yeah, you could reverse the places of these two terms and you're going to still get the same answer. However, I will say I always try to put, like, you should see this. Like, I'm sure you see the connection between these two here. They both have the 2J in common, and these both have the 9 in common. So I try to put the terms next to the one that has a common factor, or the one that looks related to it. If that sounds confusing to you, I try to put the number next to the one that it looks like it's related to. It'll make it easier for you to see the final answer and not make a mistake. However, if you reverse them, you still get the same answer. It just looks a little harder. All right, let me continue. Okay, now this part right here, I'm going to take out their greatest common factor. And by the way, I'm sorry, let me say it like this. I'm going to do what's called factor by grouping, which means I go like this, and I'm going to take out the greatest common factor of this binomial and put it here, and the greatest common factor of this binomial and put it here. This is called factor by grouping. Okay, so the greatest common factor in this group is 2j. So I take that out. And then I ask myself, 2j times what is 2j to the second power? 2j times j is 2j to the second power. And 2j times what is 2j? 2j times 1 is 2j. Over here, I'm going to do the same thing. What's the greatest common factor that they have there? 9. So now I ask myself, 9 times what is 9j? 9 times j. And 9 times what is 9? 9 times 1. Notice that I got the same thing in both parentheses. You have to get the same thing in both parentheses. If you get something different in both parentheses, that means you did something wrong. And this is going to be, I have a knock on the door. Let me try to hurry up because I don't want to erase this part. This will be my final answer. Give me 1 second while I check who's at my door. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Sorry about that. All right. Let's go on to the next problem. Okay. By now, you should be starting to get it. Okay. By now, you should be starting to get it. So now it's about like, let's make sure you got it 100%. Because again, there's another twist coming later on. You need to understand this. And I'm going to tell you, like, it's really not that difficult. The thing is, you have to actually, you're not going to get it just by looking at me. You may get it a little bit, but it's not until you start doing the problems that you will understand it. Okay? Así que deben estar entendiéndolo ya, pero hasta que no hagan los problemas ustedes, eso es cuando van a aprender, cuando lo van a entender de verdad. Pero déjame hacer más ejemplos, ¿ok? Y luego se pone un poquito más difícil cuando estamos llegando al final. Okay, so again, the process is when the leading coefficient is not 1, I got to do this process. First, ask yourself what's a times c. 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, now the factors of 6 are these. Okay, so out of that combination, which combination, when you add them, will give you 5? The 2 and the 3. Okay, aquí qué combinación cuando lo suma te da 5 sería el 2 y el 3. All right, so I'm going to use 2 and 3 to split the middle, romper el medio. All right, so the first term stays the same. El primer término se queda igual. The last term stays the same. El término al final se queda igual. But the middle term, I'm going to split the middle. I'm going to break it up into 2 using these numbers. Okay, now, sorry about that. Trying to record videos while people are knocking on my door. I'm teaching, I have my video playing in one class now. I have the bell ringing. It's okay though. That's life. All right. All right, so look, these two numbers, this is what I'm talking about. I could put the 2 in the front and the 3 in the back and I'll still get it right. But it's going to be easier to do it and to make sense of it all if I put the 3 right here, because obviously 3s and 3s squared, they have the greatest common factor is 3s. And if I put the 2 in the back, it'll just make it easier for you to see and make sense of the whole thing. If you reverse them, it's going to look a little more random and a little more complicated, even though it's the same thing, okay? So that's why I try to put the terms close to the ones where they have more in common, okay? Trato de poner estos números con el término donde tienen más en común, más factores en común. Por eso puse el 3 adelante y el 2 atrás. Pero si lo cambio de lugar, todavía se te da la respuesta correcta. All right, so now I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to put the first binomial in a group, put a plus sign, and then put the second binomial in a group. ¿ok? Esto se llama factorizando en grupos. No sé si lo traducí bien, pero más o menos. Factorizando poniéndolo en grupo. Así que pongo el primer binomio en paréntesis, el signo de sumar y el segundo binomio en paréntesis. Okay, now what's the greatest common factor in 3s squared and 3s? Obviously it's 3s. I put the parentheses. 3s times what is 3s squared? 3s times s. And 3s times what is 3s? 3s times 1. Let me do this one in Spanish. ¿Qué es el factor más grande que tienen en común estos dos términos? El 2. Así que ahora me pregunto, 2 por cuánto me da 2s, 2 por s me da 2s. Y 2 por cuánto me da 2, 2 por 1. Y siempre te tiene que dar la misma cosa en los dos paréntesis. Si no te da la misma cosa en los dos paréntesis, hiciste algo mal. Okay, now I just put this term and this term in parentheses and s plus 1 in the other parentheses, and that's my answer. If you want to check if you did it right, just multiply the two binomials together and they'll give you this original expression. So there's no reason to message me, hey mister, is this right? I don't want to get this wrong on IXL. Like a lot of people like to do, okay? No tienen por qué mandarme un mensaje preguntándome si lo hicieron bien para no coger algo mal en IXL, porque pueden chequear ustedes si están bien. Cuando multiplican estos dos binomios, te da la expresión que tenían originalmente. All right, let's do the next problem. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to ask myself is what's A times C? A times C is 20. So out of the factors of 20, what's the only combination that'll add up to 9? It's got to be 4 and 5. All right, so I'm going to split the middle. Now I'm going to start going a little quicker. I'm going to split the middle, so it's going to be 2u to the second power plus 4u plus 5u plus 10. Okay, now I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to put the first binomial in parentheses, put a plus sign, and put the second binomial in parentheses. Now the greatest common factor here would be 2u. So 2u times what equals 2u squared? 2u times u. And 2u times what equals 4u? 2u times 2. The greatest common factor here would be 5. Put the parentheses. 5 times what is 5u? 5 times u. And 5 times what is 10? 5 times 2. I know I'm right because I got the same thing in both parentheses. So my final answer is 2u plus 5 in parentheses times u plus 2. Anyone following me should start picking it up now and realizing, oh, I got this. This is not really that difficult. It just takes, you got to do, this is how math is. At first, it may seem confusing. You got to do like 3 or 4 problems, and then you start to get it. Then it starts to sink in. That's how it works. All right. So let's look at this one. The leading coefficient is not 1. So A times C equals -6. All right, now this is the first one that we look at that has a negative sign there. All right. But whatever, you do the same process. Don't let that intimidate you. All right. So what are the factors of... Let me put the factors of 6, all right? 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Okay, now when I add them up, which one is going to give me -1? It's got to give me -1 when I add them up. So you got to realize it's got to be the 2 and the 3, and the 3 has to be negative so that when I add the 2 plus -3 or the -3 plus 2, it'll give me -1 in the middle. All right, so that's important, okay? Aquí este es el primero que vemos donde A por C me da un número negativo, pero se hace la misma cosa. Aquí A por C me da -6. Escribir los factores de 6, ¿ok? Pero yo quiero que la suma me dé -1. Así que, ¿qué combinación me puede dar -1? El 2 y el 3, pero el 3 tiene que ser negativo para que cuando lo sumo con el 2 me dé -1. Ok, ahora voy a romper el medio. Now I'm going to split the middle. All right, so I'm going to put -3g and plus 2g. If you're joining us late, notice that this process is called splitting the middle. I'm breaking up the middle term into these two terms. Notice that if I add these two terms, they give me what was there originally, -g. -3g plus 2g, when you add it, gives you -g. Okay, now I'm going to factor by grouping. That means I put the first binomial in parentheses, put a plus sign, and the second binomial in parentheses. And now I'm going to take out the greatest common factor in each binomial. The greatest common factor in this binomial is 3g. 3g times g minus 1 will give me what was there. The greatest common factor here is 2. 2 times g minus 1 will give you what was there. Okay, and now I just put this term with this term inside parentheses. And in the other parentheses, g minus 1. Reminder, you always got to get the same thing in both of these parentheses if you're doing it right. Next example. Okay, a times c gives me 24. So here are the factors of 24. Out of all those factors, which combination will add up to 25? It's got to be 24 and 1. So I'm going to split the middle. 2d squared plus 24d plus 1d. I'll just write d, but there's an invisible 1 there. Plus 12. Okay, now let's factor by grouping. All right, so the greatest common factor in this group is 2d, which I multiply times d plus 12 to get the original binomial. All right, here the only greatest common factor they have is 1. Like when you don't see anything in common, that means the greatest common factor is 1. So when I take out 1, this is what's left inside the parentheses. So my final answer is going to be 2d plus 1 times d plus 12. All right, let me see something. Okay, now we're going to start looking at the problems that are more difficult, all right, the more challenging problems in this IXL. So I recommend that you stop what you're doing and make sure you're paying attention, all right, because these involve one more step. Okay, ahora vamos a mirar los problemas que son más difíciles, lo que tienen un paso más, así que deben parar lo que están haciendo y poner atención. Okay, so in these problems, remember that I said at the beginning of the video that you should always check whether there's a greatest common factor that you could take out at the beginning of your problem. And that's going to be the case in all the examples I'm going to do from here on out in this video. Okay, in all of them, you could take out a greatest common factor at the beginning. If you forget to do it at the beginning, can you do it at the end? Yes, I'll show you how as well. But if you don't take out the greatest common factor either at the beginning or at the end, you're going to get it marked wrong. So this is an important step. And it actually doing this makes the problem easier. So if you forget, don't worry, you'll get to some questions where the numbers are going to be bigger than what you're used to, and you're going to hopefully realize that you can make the problem smaller by taking out the greatest common factor. So these three terms, you should realize that they have a greatest common factor. That greatest common factor is 6. If I take out 6, I get this new problem. Right? Si saco el 6 al principio, porque ese es el factor más grande que tienen en común, entonces van a tener este nuevo problema que es más fácil. Okay, so once I do that, now I'm going to treat the rest. Now this is my new problem. The 6 is just going to stay there all the way until the end. The 6 is going to be in your final answer. All right, but this is my new problem that I'm going to do just like the same way I did all the previous problems. El 6 se queda ahí hasta el final. El 6 es parte de tu respuesta final. Ahora voy a tratar este problema, esta expresión aquí como si ese es mi nuevo problema y voy a seguir los mismos pasos que le estaba enseñando en los ejemplos anteriores. All right, so I'm going to ask myself what's a times c. Okay, a times c, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. So of the factors of 10, which combination will give me negative 3? Okay, this combination. And I got to make the 5 negative so that when I add the negative 5 plus 2, I get negative 3. So now I'm going to split the middle. Okay, ahora voy a romper en medio. So I'm going to have this. 6 times 2z to the second power. Okay, the negative 3z, I'm going to replace it with plus 2z minus 5z, and then minus 5 over here. I put the negative 5 in the back and the 2 in the front to keep them close to their related terms. Okay, now I'm going to factor by grouping. Now look, I'm going to put brackets here just to differentiate between the brackets and the parentheses. You could do the same. It would be a good idea. All right, so now I got this. Actually, I should have held off and put the brackets in the next step, but whatever. It's not a big deal. Okay, now I got this. Okay, now, what's the greatest common factor of this term? 2z. 2z times what will give me this binomial? 2z times z plus 1. What's the greatest common factor of this binomial? Negative 5. Negative 5 times what will give me negative 5z minus 5 times z plus 1. Right? Because negative 5 times z is negative 5z, and negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Okay? Now the 6 is going to stay out here. I'm running out of space. Let me write it here. The 6 stays out here. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to put 2z minus 5. And inside the other parentheses, z plus 1. Okay, which is what's in here. All right, if that seemed like a lot, give me a second. Let me do another example. But listen, not every IXL are you going to be able to do it in 2 or 3 minutes. All right, this is math. Sometimes you got to do work, just like in life. You're either going to do it, step up and do it, or you're going to wimp out, which is what, sadly, a lot of you guys do. What does that say about you? All right, I hope most of you will step up and do it and learn how to do this because it's not difficult. All right. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so obviously you should see that these numbers are kind of big. It should tip you off that if you do 10 times 25, you get 250. By the way, I said I was going to show you. Now, you know what? Before I do this one, let's go back to this one. Let me show you what happens if you forget to take out the greatest common factor at the beginning. All right? Déjame enseñarle lo que pasa si se le olvida sacar el factor más grande en común al principio. All right, so if I forget, right? Then at the beginning, I'm going to do a times c, which will give you negative 360. Te da negativo 360. Now, I'm not going to write all the factors of 360 because I could already tell that the factors that are going to work are the numbers that are right here. 12 times negative 30. When I combine negative 30 plus 12, I get negative 18. All right, so it wasn't necessary for me to write out all the factors because the numbers work out easy on this one. Okay, so let me use those so I can show you what happens. If I split the middle using these numbers, I'm going to have 12z to the second power plus 12z minus 30z minus 30. All I did is I'm using these numbers right here to split the middle. Estoy usando estos números para romper el medio porque me di cuenta que con este número y con este número el producto te da negativo 360 y la suma te da negativo 18. Así que no tuve que escribir todos los factores de 360, que hubiera sido un dolor de cabeza. All right, it would have been a headache to write all that out. Okay, so now factor by grouping. Factorizar haciendo grupos. All right, so the greatest common factor here would be 12z times z plus 1 and negative 30 times z plus 1. So my answer, I'm not done yet, but my answer would appear to be this. However, if you put this in IXL, it's going to mark it wrong because it's not simplified. It's not fully factored. It could be further factored. So look at my answer a second. Even if you weren't paying attention to the whole thing, this is wrong. Well, it's not wrong. It's just not fully factored. If you put this in IXL, you're going to get it marked wrong. So please look at this, even if you weren't paying attention. Okay? Si ponen esta respuesta en IXL, te lo va a marcar mal porque todavía se puede factorizar más. Básicamente no está simplificado todavía. Esto es si se le olvida sacar el factor más grande en común al principio. ¿Ok? Lo que tengo que hacer ahora es sacar el factor más grande que tiene en común este binomio. All right, to finish it off, what I would have to do is take out the greatest common factor of this binomial, which is 6. When I take out that 6, I still have this back here. When I take out that 6, it'll be 6 times what is 12z? 6 times 2z. And 6 times what is negative 30? 6 times negative 5. Now, this is the same answer I got originally. Ahora esta es la misma respuesta que tenía originalmente. Okay, now it's fully factored. I can't factor this any further. Ahora sí que lo factoricé todo posible. Ahora sí que está simplificado. But the other, if you leave it in this form, it's not simplified. You could factor it further. All right, so if you put this answer in IXL, you're going to get it marked wrong. This is the fully factorized answer. All right, now let me go to this one. So on this one, I should first take out the greatest common factor, which is 5. En este primero saco el factor más grande que tienen en común, que es 5. So I'm going to have 2p to the second power plus 7p plus 5. Okay, now the 5 is going to stay out there all the way to the end, to my final answer. I'm going to treat this as my new problem. So now a times c equals a times c. 2 times 5 is 10. And out of the factors of 10, the only combination that'll add up to 7 is the 2 and the 5. So now I'm going to split the middle. Ahora voy a romper en medio. I'm going to split it up into 2p plus 5p. Now factor by grouping. To save space, let me switch colors. So I'm going to put this in parentheses and this in parentheses. So what's the greatest common factor? Whoops. What's the greatest common factor of this binomial? 2p. 2p times what will give me the original binomial? 2p times p plus 1. What's the greatest common factor here? 5. 5 times what will give you this binomial? 5 times p plus 1. Now my final answer is going to be 5 times 2p plus 5 times p plus 1. It's really not that difficult. You just got to know your stuff and get in there and grind it out. You got to work it out, all right? It's not going to happen by magic. You got to do some work, all right? But it's satisfying at the end when you get your answer and you're like, hey, I got this. This is not a big deal. All right, that's how you get better. That's how you get stronger. Eventually, you got to lift heavier weights, all right? Eventually, you got to put heavier weights if you want your muscles to grow further than they already have. Some of you, you're not even lifting weights. You're not even in the gym yet. Some of you need to walk into the gym and stop being weak. All right, where was I? All right, so let me do 2 more examples like this because let me see how long, because this video might be taking too long. All right, so right here, our greatest common factor that I can take out is 5. Okay, el factor más grande que puedo sacar es 5. So I'm going to have 2y squared minus 15y plus 18. Okay, so now I'm going to ask myself, what's a times c? A times c is 36. The factors of 36 are 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. All right, so out of that combination, which one will give you a 15 right here? If I make them both negative, the sum will give me negative 15, and if I multiply them, it'll give me positive 36. So I'm going to split the middle. When I split the middle, let me use a different color. Maybe it'll make it easier for some people to get it. Okay, so I'm going to split the middle into negative 12y minus 3y. Okay, now I'm gonna factor by grouping. So I'm gonna have 5. Let me put brackets. 2y squared minus 12y plus negative 3y plus 18. So now the greatest common factor of this binomial is 2y times y minus 6. And the greatest common factor of this binomial would be, in order to get the same thing in both parentheses, I got to take out negative 3, right? If you ever feel like you're doing it right, but the signs, the only thing that's different, the only thing that's messing you up is the signs, it's because you most likely have to take out a negative number instead of a positive number in order to get the same thing in both parentheses, right? I'm sure some of you will encounter that. All right, so now my final answer is going to be 5 times 2y minus 3 times y minus 6. All right, let's look at this example. In this one, when I take out the greatest common factor, look what happens. When I take out the greatest common factor, which is 5, I end up inside the parentheses with a quadratic expression where the leading coefficient is 1. And those you could do mental math. All right, if you forgot, I'll remind you. When the leading coefficient is 1, I just break it up like this. I put v, and I need two numbers that when I multiply them, give me 2, but when I add them, they got to give you 3. So it's obviously 2 and 1. In other words, two numbers that when you multiply them, they give you the C term, but when you add them, they give you the B term. And that's my answer. So these are one of the few that you'll be able to do mental math in this IXL, okay? Aquí cuando saqué el factor más grande que tienen en común, que es el 5, ahora el coeficiente al principio es 1. Y esos problemas sí se pueden hacer fácil en la mente. Se lo rompe de esta manera y necesito dos números que cuando se multiplican te da el término C y cuando lo suma te tiene que dar el término B. Así que cuando lo multiplico me tiene que dar 2, cuando lo sumo me tiene que dar 3. All right, so on to this one. The greatest common factor is 2. So when I take that out, I'm going to have k squared plus 14k minus 32. And again, now the leading coefficient is 1, so I could do that one quickly. Just put k and k. And I need two numbers that when you multiply them give you negative 32, but when you add them give you positive 14. And that is going to be, let me think for a second. The factors of 32 are, oh, here we go. 2 and 16. I always forget that one. All right, so positive 16 and negative 2 will work. Positive 16 and negative 2. And that would be your final answer. Okay, I'm going to make this one the last example. All right, este va a ser el último ejemplo. All right, so again, at the beginning, I take out the greatest common factor. Saco el factor más grande que tienen en común, which in this case would be 2. When I take out the 2, I'm going to have 3h squared minus 14h plus 11. Now I'm going to ask myself what's a times c. A times c here would be 33. The factors of 33 are 1 times 33 and 3 times 11. Okay, and the only combination that will give me this negative 14 is the 3 and the 11. If I make them both negative, it'll work. All right, so I'm going to split the middle. I'm going to have 2 times 3h squared, negative 14h. I'm going to split it into, negative 3h minus 11h. And again, notice how I try to put the terms next to the terms that they have more in common with. All right, so I have that now. Okay. So now I'm going to factor by grouping. The greatest common factor in this group would be 3h. 3h times h minus 1. And in this group, it would be, you got to take out negative 11 so that when you multiply it, you'll also get h minus 1. If you take out positive 11, it's not going to work. All right, so my final answer is going to be 2 times 3h minus 11 times h minus 1. There is my answer. Alright guys, so that's it for this IXL. Again, highly recommend that you do this one. This stuff is all over the Algebra 1 EOC. Alright? You need to conquer it. You need to conquer your fears. You can't just do the easy stuff. You eventually got to do the hard stuff if you want to get good. If you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. You got to do the hardest stuff. You got to conquer it. Alright? And I promise you, if you use my video and do a few examples at a time, you're going to get it. You may not get it the first time, but after 3 or 4 problems, you'll see the pattern and realize it's really not that difficult. Okay, you just got to work it out. And I had to work it out, so you're going to have to work it out as well. All right, guys, that's it for today. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next class.